it's obviously a malaise that is negatively impacting our societies, but it's also an opportunity. If you would like to re-establish liberal democracy, if you would like to get rid of illiberal authoritarians, your first task is not to address and potentially decrease social polarization. Your task is to win the polarization game and win in mobilization. This is what happened in 2020 in Slovakia. This is what happened in 2023 in Poland. This is what can safeguard American democracy on the 5th of November. And this is the only way for Hungary. And we see this clear path to re-establish liberal democracy. So potentially international partners and donors should start supporting programs to decrease and address social polarization once liberal democrats are back in power. Until then, I think it would be a better investment to focus on public participation, democracy education, that can help actually liberal democrats to win the mobilization game. We see the clear signs of change in Hungary. We see new alternatives. We have seen the end of the old opposition in Hungary. I am not necessarily celebrating that because I think the view many international observers had about, over the Hungarian opposition was very homogeneous. We see actually the near end of parties which has had nothing to do with old post-communist structures. But it's a matter of fact that, that we have a new political alternative labeled and led by Péter Magyar and the party Respect and Freedom. And actually what's interesting that it's a pig in a poke, or as Hungarians would say, cat in a bag political alternative. We don't know anything about it. It's actually a clear sheet, and it's so successful and effective because a very broad spectrum of the Hungarian society can actually project its own value-based expectations and wishes on that surface. And actually this is a positive thing because it might be necessary to be able to build majorities and potentially beat Fidesz sometime in the future. The downside is that we don't know what's the relationship of that political power or actor with the values we share and with the foreign policy and geopolitical orientations and priorities we share. It might be necessary to get majorities, but it also actually incorporates certain threats of continuity with the current regime. And I think this leads back to my first point. The sooner and the more intensive international partners starts to work actually with the broad spectrum of the Hungarian society, with new actors, the better chances they have to keep all of these developments in the right track. My second point would be that we see an increasing role of foreign policy and geopolitical choices in sustaining the Hungarian regime. Welfare legitimacy and output legitimacy of the government is actually gone. Economic performance is on the verge of collapse. We see how the narrative of the Orbán regime is thinning out and weakening. And against that background, the sheer fact that Prime Minister Orbán states to play a crucial role at the international stage, it's an important legitimization factor for him in the core electorate. And also, it can help him to attract new resources, as we see, for example, with regard to new FDI coming from China. It has two very far-reaching consequences. The first is that actually the autocratization of the country and its multivectoral foreign policy already went hand in hand over the past decade since 2014. But now Hungary is clearly a swing state with divided loyalties between the Western alliance system, where it officially belongs, and actually those geopolitical partners which are the key contenders of the West, but actually have very deep shared interest structures with the Hungarian regime. It's clear at the level of security policy, with regards to Ukraine, relationship to Russia, but now it's becoming also very obvious with regards to geo-economic embedment. Hungary is diversifying away from the German industrial network into the Chinese one, at the field of battery production, electric vehicles, and so on. It raises the stakes for international partners, but it also raises the stake for Hungarian opposition and civil society. And why? Because everyone who is not sharing actually these objectives or these visions is de facto a traitor serving foreign interests. And this will lead to my third point, which is that there is one certainty in Hungarian politics, and it is that with a thinning out narrative, the mobilization of the regime will be continuously built on scapegoating and mobilization against concepts of enemies. And although we have seen over the past years that this is a very dynamically changing landscape, I think civil society and free media will really remain in the center of that mobilization and practically as being framed as concept of public enemies of the Hungarian nation. Filip mentioned the 2017 Hungarian anti-NGO law, which, thanks to the Court of Justice of the European Union, is not anymore in power. But potentially we should remind ourselves that Hungary is a country which has its third anti-NGO law adopted within the European Union, and it's in power. That's a sovereignty protection law. And our colleagues in the regime are diligently working on the fourth one. And it was already announced. Just as the Russian anti-NGO law and foreign agent law became a blueprint for other international stakeholders a decade ago, now the Hungarian one is becoming a blueprint. If you take a look on the Georgian law, it's a clear copycat of the Hungarian one, not the Russian one. We see the spreading of the model, the Slovakian law. In Bulgaria, a similar anti-NGO law was proposed just this week in the parliament by the Radical Right Party Renewal. It's actually a model that is becoming very fashionable. And against that background, I think, and just a last thought and a last reminder, this is a very effective strategy in many respects. First and foremost, because it forces donors and partners to focus actually at that level of the civil society, which is practically the least impacted by these laws. It forces us to focus on the surface. Because those organizations, which are actually the crème de la crème of Hungarian civil society, the leading watchdogs, who are directly attacked by all of these legislations, they are not the targets of the legislation. Their behavior won't change. They have the resources, or at least they have better resources in institutional, financial, organizational, psychological, human resource terms to resist than the rest of the Hungarian civil society. The real impact, the real chilling effect is actually in the rest. Those local organizations, for example, which were forced by the sovereignty protection law to make the strategic choice whether they support candidates at local level or whether they are ready to receive even 1 euro cent of foreign funding. Those who don't have the resources to oppose direct intimidation from authorities and therefore decide to engage in non-controversial, non-political topics. And my ask here would be that obviously we need to provide any support we can for those organizations who are directly attacked. But please look beyond that point. I think we also have seen a renaissance of Hungarian civil society over the past year outside of the capital city. And it's a very big achievement. We need to lay the groundwork and keep the structures for a better future, and in order to do so, simply resources are needed. I know that we are always coming back to this point, and I know that there are some colleagues of us who argue that it's not a resource question. At the end of the day, everything is a resource question, and quantity is a quality in itself. Please look beyond the obvious targets, and I know that it's not in accordance with the principle of concentration of the resources, but try to found a broad spectrum of Hungarian civil society, because they are actually the key actors of future social and political change. So thank you so much. I'm stopping here, and really sorry if I overstepped my time limit. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm sure there are, for the very interesting points and insights, I'm sure there are many more questions than before we may have, but I think it's good. This is also the reason why we are having this discussion. But for this moment, I would suggest that we will move to another country, which will be Slovakia, which is also very interesting case study. We may say that the country that have already experience of removing populist government in 2018. It was yes, after the massive protest that spread out across the country after the assassination of the investigative journalist Jan Kuciak. But then, after the new government was formed and there was some internal fights, quarrels, and this government collapsed, and there were snap elections in 2023, and the previous, as you know, the previous prime minister, he came back with a new strength and new ideas how to actually struggle and destroy many institutions, and starting with the independent media. And then, as you heard, what happened this May, there was an attempted assassination of the prime minister, and after that, after he recovered partially, then he was right away actually attacking media and civil society organizations by at least for not recognizing the importance of his assassination, maybe not speaking openly that they are responsible, but okay, maybe you, Grigorij, will be able to understand a bit better, but maybe it's not the most important fact. The most important fact is that then, after that, in the next weeks, over the summer, they started doing what was already expected and promised before, taking over control on the public media, changing the government, the management in the media. And also, as far as I heard, there is also a preparation on the Slovak version of the Foreign Agents Law that will control civil society organizations in the country. So, in this respect, I wanted to ask you then now, Grigorij, to try to explain us a bit what's going on in Slovakia, and maybe also to tell some things, to present some ideas how civil society organizations are self-organizing to counteract these events, these trends. Even if it's not only like the first steps, because everything is quite fresh, I would say, but the things, as far as I see, the things are going very fast. So, Grigorij, please.
Thank you very much, Filip. Thank you very much to NDI and Institute of Public Affairs for inviting me. Yes, Slovakia is a really very strange case. Just I would start by a short statement about broader context. That Slovakia, since its independence, which country reached in 1993, was governed by two types of political parties: national populist and pro-liberal democratic parties, and national populist governed longer than the liberal Democrats. And of course there were another periods of backsliding. The first was immediately after creation of Slovak independent state, and especially since 1994-1998, when Mečiar's government was ousted. Then we had quite turbulent development, but still in the framework of liberal democratic regime. We entered EU and NATO, and Slovakia was considered as a success story, even when national populists, including Robert Fico, governed this country. But now something is happening which is deviating from this model when both mainstream national populist and liberal democratic forces are ruling the country in accordance with the norms and rules of liberal democracy. And government which was formed in October last year immediately, since the beginning, started to implement the strategy of broad societal revision, especially in political sphere. And it's not only the revision of the policies of the previous administration. It's revision of the fundamentals of liberal democratic regime. In some spheres, they really went quite far, in some maybe not so far, but it's really backsliding, which is bringing the risk that if these political forces will be longer in power, the liberal democratic regime in Slovakia will be dismantled. Just to understand, I mean, how this ruling coalition is behaving, they are not over-dominating actor. After results of elections were announced, theoretically other possibility existed that it will not be formed again the national populist ruling coalition, but one part of the political spectrum on this side considered that maybe, from my point of view, it was unrealistic considerations, but maybe they will be part of the ruling coalition with the democratic forces. It didn't happen. This party, the party of the current, de facto party of the current president, Peter Pellegrini, they were splinters from Smer, but more moderate splinters. And there were considerations that maybe, I mean, for their better future, they will form the coalition with liberal democrats. It didn't happen. So this party de facto returned to its national populist past. Now they're a very loyal part of the ruling coalition, and they're really dismantling liberal democracy, behaving as an over-dominated political force. But, I mean, they have very tiny majority in the parliament, just 4 seats more than the half of the all deputies. So it means that, I mean, to consolidate all the changes and what they did, for example, in the area of rule of law enforcement organs, they completely purged. So they abolished some extremely important institutions in fight against corruption, against criminality, like Office of Special Prosecutor. It doesn't exist anymore. They even didn't promise before elections that they will do this, but they did. Then the Slovak version of FBI, this National Criminal Agency, also was abolished. The leadership, the higher management of all police units were completely fired and replaced by the loyalists. So the situation is really quite serious now. The revision is implemented in 3 areas. Rule of law and law enforcement institutions, then civil society. I will speak maybe more about civil society, but just for, for understanding why FICO started with law enforcement organs, and media. I think that these 3 lines are absolutely clear, visible, that the ruling coalition is now systematically focused on creation of conditions in which they will consolidate their power in law enforcement organ, they will normalize public service, media, and they will create conditions in which civil society will not act as a legitimate actor of public policy in broader sense. But now, it's not first time when Robert Fico returned to power and his party. It was, now he is the Prime Minister the 4th time, but he returned before 2 times to the power when he previously lost elections. Why it happened, I think it's for longer elaboration. Partially, Filip, you mentioned these problems after creation of the really, and Daniel was right when he described 2020 year as a year which brought hopes for liberal democracy, because it was a government, center-right government, conservative liberal government, which replaced Robert Fico, who till 2020, together with his loyalists from other parties, really started, de facto built the clientelist system of power. And then Robert Fico lost the power. First he was ousted after this mass manifestation, protest manifestation after murder of Jan Kuciak, but then the party lost, Smer party lost elections, and it was clear that the new ruling coalition would violate very informal kind of deal or pact that we can, which existed informally, of course, existed between political actors, competing parties, especially between National Populists and Liberal Democrats, that we can attack, we can condemn, we can verbally criminalize all our competitors, but nobody is going to jail. It was a kind of informal, deal which was followed more or less by all political actors. I don't want to elaborate what were considerations behind of this, but somehow it was abided. And the new ruling coalition headed by Mr. Matović, he became prime minister. I think that he was absolutely unqualified, and he was absolutely unsuitable for this position, and he resigned after a year of his performance as a prime minister, but he became prime minister, and he was known by his absolutely irreconcilable attitude to Robert Fico and the previous government. And we can have a lot of objections against him and against the government, which at that time took over. Mr. Matović was replaced by Mr. Heger, and really the governance was quite chaotic. The circumstances were very grave for this coalition: COVID, energy crisis, inflation, and then Russian-Ukrainian war. But in one thing, I think that we have to give credit to this government. They de facto freed hands for law enforcement organs to investigate the real committed crimes with political background. And it happened, and Robert Fico was accused in 3 committed criminal acts. Not only him. Dozens of people were investigated, indicted. There were court processes, and some people, rather a couple of dozens, went to the jail. They were imprisoned on the basis of the legal verdicts. Robert Fico, through the legal trick committed by prosecutor general, was de facto freed. So these accusations were cancelled. But for Robert Fico, it was, from his point of view, unbelievable experience, because he didn't believe, I think, and still he doesn't believe in the principle of equality. So that's why he is today so radical in dismantling the fundamentals of liberal democracy in the area of rule of law. So why it happened that the previous political arrangement, Fico's party returned to power, as I said, it's for longer elaboration, but the motivation is very clear. Robert Fico returned to power in order to provide for himself and for his loyalists the life-lasting impunity and immunity. And that's why he immediately focused on the revision in law enforcement organs. So what he succeeded to do to him and in favor of him and in favor of his loyalists since the beginning of performance of this government, really he completely changed the sector of law enforcement. So today they are politically grabbed, and now they are trying, there are 2 lines in this, so to free all those people who were legally imprisoned, or to stop investigations. They amended the penal code, so it's 1 line, and they are very successful in this. And the second line, they are not very successful because there is no substance. They are trying to criminalize, not verbally, but legally, the opposition. And there was some background information that in order to equalize their people who were ruling this country before and the currently opposition, but partially this opposition governed in the previous period before they took over the office, to criminalize them legally. In order, the population would have this feeling that, I mean, all are the same. Yes, our leaders, this criminal case were manipulated, they were biased, so it's one of the main propaganda line in Fico's approach to voters, but at the same time look to the current opposition, they also did bad things, and some of them are criminals. But I think that in this line, they are not very successful. Yeah, and now media, I will skip media, but now civil society. So Robert Fico is personally, I think, the typical enemy of civil society. He doesn't believe to the civic principles of engagement, participation on independent non-party actors in the process of governance, and of course not in the process of broader monitoring of the situation in the country. He recognizes only one authority if your legitimacy is based on decision of people in political processes. If you have seats in the parliament, you are credible, you are with legitimacy. If you do not have such legitimacy, then regardless of whether you are qualified, you are experienced, you have support from different groups of the population, they cannot do the same work. And but knowing that democracy is bringing conditions for civil society operations, civil society actors, he is considering civil society organizations as a political competitor who are trying to grab power or to diminish power of these legitimate political actors. And what he started to do, his party, but he is personally very engaged in this because he is presenting these terrible things either the level of discourse or in practical area. And just let me to enumerate a couple of lines which are now the dominating in these government activities concerning the civil society. First, it's intentional creation of hostile societal atmosphere against civil society, against non-governmental civic sector as whole. These are attacks on NGOs, misinterpreting their role and place, putting in doubt their legitimacy and credibility, defaming their missions and aims as well as results of their work. They are describing, and especially Mr. Fico himself, as anti-national aligned actors, enemies of the nation and state, as agents of the foreign, Western, global, US, Brussels interest and influence. They are submitting legislative proposals. I know that on October session of plenary session of the Parliament, they will have deliberations about these proposals, and these amendments are aimed to weaken and de facto liquidating the NGOs labeled as a political. It's very strange that they consider all civic initiatives which are dealing with issues of democracy, human rights, minority rights, civil liberties, watchdog organizations, think tanks, so all these pro-democracy organizations, he labeled them as a political. So they are political, means that he considers them as a political competitors, and it's maybe not the same as a law on foreign agents in Slovakia. I think that they are quite cautious. So initially they wanted to approve this law about foreign agents, but then the signals from the European Commission, I think that somehow discouraged them, so they invented the new term, so it's an organization with the foreign support. But what they want to do, they want to create conditions for very easy impact of governmental activities to NGO, to liquidate them on different pretexts without authorization from judiciary. Then, of course, cancellation of the grant schemes. So they completely, de facto, they completely cancelled on financial sense cooperation between the government and NGOs. There were some special grant schemes in select ministries which helped to NGOs to conduct the activities. They completely canceled this. Then they are preparing legislation which would have to deprive NGOs of funding from tax assignations. And of course, verbal insults of the individual representatives of civil society organizations, and now it's Slovak participants would understand what I'm speaking about, the case of Šimečka and Šimečka's foundation. Michal Šimečka is the leader of the strongest opposition party. His grandfather was a very famous Slovak public figure dissident, and his father is quite famous Slovak journalist and publicist, and now Mr. Fico was presenting narratives mixing completely all these three completely different persons in order to blame them that political opposition is trying to mobilize people for material benefits of one foundation named Šimečka Foundation. So the typical example of defamation, which I think is violating not only some legal norms, but even normal human approach.
Okay, Grigorij, thank you very much. Yes, let's stop here. Yes, thank you.
Because we have literally like 17 minutes left.
No, it's 1 hour almost, 50 minutes we have. Don't worry.
I'm sorry if I'm all...
It's okay. Yes, so thank you also. We can see many similarities also with what we have faced already in Poland when it comes to also suppressing civil society and using similar tools, but also regarding media that you didn't mention, but I mean, it's totally fine. And because of that, also, I would like now to move to Poland, because Poland is still being presented as a champion of one of the first countries that actually is innovating in overturning the populist rule and trying to recover somehow from that, which is a very, very difficult job, and it was already mentioned in the beginning as well. But in the same time, there are also some dissatisfaction as well growing, especially on amongst the organizations that were also involved in actually fighting to overturn the previous government, fighting for engaging more women, more young people, but also to engage more and to work for many minorities. And now they are seeing actually no change being made by the government for almost like 9 months. Maybe it's still small, but nevertheless, I can hear these voices, and we cannot forget about them. And these expectations are still large, and so on. So here I would like to ask Ms. Elżbieta Korolczuk to maybe tell us a bit about the country where we are now, what's going on here. I mean, what are these main trends when it comes to the civil society? As I said, I have the feeling that it's a bit mixed, and this is some disappointment, but also that there were, maybe there are also still some hopes, and there's a lot of things also ongoing, happening as well, and definitely the situation is much better than it was 1 year ago, so it is nothing to be discussed, I think, but still the issues are there, and maybe the questions for what will be in the future, but we will get to that. Let's focus on the current situation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and for this discussion. And obviously, the Polish civil society has proved that it has a lot of resilience, a lot of energy, a lot of capacity for mobilization, a lot of courage and energy to work against very difficult circumstances. Of course, we are, I think, all extremely proud that we managed to sort of break the spell of right-wing populism, so to speak. But at the same time, I think that we have to acknowledge the challenges, which are partly something that is happening all over the world, partly the outcome of those 8 years of struggles, and partly something that is in a way new because we have to rethink, I guess, our vision of the civil society versus the state and democracy. And I would like to talk very briefly about 3 things: pillarization, politicization and the relation between civil society and democracy, and the very definition of civil society. So starting with polarization, we have quite a lot of studies now, and I think we have a lot of experience of the fact that while we think about civil society as a sort of broad sphere of people who have basically the same goals, the same values, more or less, they sometimes compete, sometimes get in conflict, but they're basically forming a whole, in a sense, right? In the space between the state and the family or the church. In reality, we can see the process of pillarization, which means that organizations, civil society movements, social movements, activism, is forming pillars who are connected vertically, but not connected horizontally. And that means that we don't have civil society, we have civil societies or different camps or groups within that. And the question is, of course, how to deal with that? How to deal with the deep fissures, which are ideological, but now also connected with, for example, sort of individuals who have been affected by smear campaigns, for example, and other very ugly types of attacks. And the question is how to start from this situation and weave connections with people that we often don't have that many in common. And that process of polarization, of course, means that specific pillars are connected to specific political camps. And that brings me to the second issue, which is politicization. Obviously, we have this idea of civil society as apolitical in a sense that it is not connected to specific parties, or it should not, as Jacek said, support specific parties in elections. But the thing is that under authoritarian rule, we can no longer uphold this ideal. I mean, my vision is actually that politics is about working of power, and what we do is deeply political. But the question is how to deal with the party politics. And the fact that during those 8 years, many civil society organizations have been engaged with working with political parties, or quite a few people who have been in civil society have moved to political sphere, right? So we have our people there. And then comes the frustration and the sense of betrayal and the sense of being not listened to again, especially on the part of those organizations which don't have strong organizational capacity, who are not influential, who are not part of civil society elites. And I'm thinking mostly about basically social movements, right? Feminist movements, people who are working on behalf of the refugees at the Belarusian border, people who are working on behalf of environmental issues. They have now, quite a lot of them, very strong sense that they have been abandoned, to say the least, right? So the question is, and I hope that we will discuss it more during this meeting, how to hold the power holders accountable when they are ours, or at least democratic and liberal politicians. And that is a very delicate problem, I would say, because you can see very clearly that many civil society organizations withhold their criticism or try not to attack directly the people in power because of those ties, because of the fact that, well, we don't have that many people to choose from that we can support, right? But at the same time, the question is, when are we becoming part of the problem? When are we the ones who are not really taking accountability seriously? What type of relation, like, what is the distance that allows us to actually push for, effectively, for the things that we really want, but not create a sense of alienation, a sense of conflict? Because obviously we don't want that. And that brings me to my third point about civil society and democracy. Obviously, and I think this is very present here in this space, for the last 30, 40 years, we had this vision that civil society is good for democracy, right? The backbone of democracy. That's why international donors support it. That's why we have to strengthen civil society. That's why we have to put all our efforts to make it stronger. But as a scholar who has been analyzing civil society for 20-something years, and for the last 10 years I've been looking specifically at ultra-conservative social movements, anti-gender movements in Poland and abroad. Well, I think we all know now that not all social movements, not all activists are pro-democratic, that not all of them are keen on promoting pluralism, inclusion, all the things that, for me, are crucial for democracy. So the question is, and this is a question for donors, this is a question for the state, this is a question for us in terms of people, because I believe myself also to be not maybe activist anymore, but a person engaged in civil society. The question is, how do we draw the line between pluralism? Because obviously, I mean, there are people who have conservative views on, I don't know, gender or whatever, even ultra-conservative views. And they will not go away, they will not wither, they will not die away. I mean, it's not only generational thing. We will not educate all of them, that's for sure, because I think that ideological differences are very much grounded in our histories. And I'm from Białystok, from a very conservative Catholic family, so I have it in my sort of individual experience. But at the same time, we can very clearly see that many of those organizations, and I'm not talking about astroturfing, I'm not talking about gongos, I'm talking about grassroots activism, which is as authentic as any type of feminist or liberal type of activism, which can be a conveyor belt to violence, to a form of fascism. Because unfortunately, when you start to create divisions between people and create groups of second-class citizens, or when you talk about the fact that minorities are a danger, so we are legitimate in our possibilities to basically violate their rights because we have to protect ourselves, this is where democracy ends. So I think that we really have to rethink our sort of ideal vision of civil society and actually be able to negotiate the fine line between people that we want on board, in a sense, that we want to at least try to establish some form of a debate with, and those groups which are dangerous to democracy, which are dangerous to the well-being of people who are basically not I would say, not only ideologically different, but also who support and promote violence. Because I think that this is the ultimate element that should always be sort of a guidance for us in terms of what is acceptable and what is not. So these are the three things, and they're obviously connected, and I'm sure that this is just a start of the list. I focused on challenges because I think that as much as we feel exhausted and tired, we really need to have the energy to work on that. But I don't think that these are the questions that are impossible to answer. To the contrary, I think we have some ideas how to deal with that, and we are able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, first of all, for being concise and also for drawing these questions that I believe we will try also, at least some of them maybe, to answer or try to look for some answers during our event over these 2 days. Now, last but not least, I suggest that we move maybe further away from at least Visegrad 4 countries to look a bit on what's going on in Romania, which quite often maybe seen as a country that is not facing that serious problems as all the countries that have been discussed until now. But maybe it's not true, as we talked about that over the dinner, if I can share this with you, but yesterday. But also it's a country that also have experience of having very active civil society, being able to also to fight with systemic corruption in the country, organizing movements that were also successful and so on. And also it's a country that is facing a lot of elections, a lot, all of them actually, this year, which also puts this country in a spot, being very interesting case study. And I'm very happy that we have Cezara Grama with us to maybe explain us a bit about what are these main trends that we should focus on in Romania.
Thank you for having me, first of all. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very honored to be part of this panel. It's always very intimidating to be speaking, usually when it's a context of Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Czechia, and then Romania and Bulgaria are somewhere over there, a little bit. And to be honest, when I was preparing a little bit for this conversation, I started my notes, and I started with challenges. And then I thought, oof, maybe this is not the best way to go. Maybe we need a more positive kind of response and not do challenges. But then after hearing all of these panelists, I feel a little bit more comfortable talking about challenges. So I will go with my instinct, let's say. Yes, you would say perhaps not so many things. You don't hear nowadays as many things about crisis of rule of law, about Romania. There was a time where this was perhaps very talked about. We go back to, as Filip said, the years where there was constant protests on the street in Romania. We're talking about 2017, 2018. We are talking about the anti-corruption protests, justice protests, pro-justice protests. Things have changed a lot. There is, I say, there's a lot of silence. Silence is never good, in my opinion, because that means that there are things that are not being heard. And I think this is one of the frustrations that civil society organizations in Romania have been feeling lately, in the last couple of years, that there is too much silence on issues that are actually quite as dangerous or as dangerous as they used to be in 2017, 2018. But perhaps the focus of or the region at European level no longer is on those things, because we have a war next door, which has changed completely the perspective of what we're focusing in Romania. And our sensation a lot of the times is that rule of law issues have been left a little bit to the side. We will deal with them later. We have different focuses right now to look at. Which from the perspective of civil society is quite dangerous, because in a couple of years when we might want to talk about them, it might be very late. Because from my perspective, what we're seeing is a weakening of checks and balances of any kind of accountability in the last years, especially since the pandemic. The pandemic has created a context where it has created possibilities for political parties and political forces to weaken a lot of the checks and balances and any kind of accountability mechanisms. Again, we go back to 2017 to the years where the priorities for Romania were justice reform, the fight against corruption. We had been able to put together institutions who were starting to fight and to keep accountable people who had misused public funds, who were dealing with corruption on a regular level. This is no longer happening, because since in the last 4 years there has been a constant and very effective attempts of weakening institutions that could hold politicians accountable to begin with. And we're talking specifically about corruption institutions, anti-corruption institutions and justice. But we're also talking about the public administration overall. And I think this is very dangerous, and it is becoming increasingly dangerous, and it's becoming increasingly dangerous for civil society organizations who, similar to everywhere else around Europe, have been dealing with slaps, much more than we've ever had. Slaps in the traditional sense, but also, at least in the last year and a half, we've seen very influential groups being able to shut down organizations through court procedures where they were litigating for public interest, and they were asked to pay legal fees in amounts that they could not afford. And when that happened, the courts allowed for them to be held to pay for this kind of legal fees. They were declared bankrupt and closed. This is perhaps the first time that we've seen this happen. We've had attempts before at weakening civil society, but more traditional. amending legislation, make it in a way a very vague provision that would allow, I don't know for what institution to say that you've perhaps gone over the objective of your organization and closed your organization. They've attempted this in the past, but this was never successful. Civil society organizations usually kind of protested against this with support from regional European partners, other European coalitions of NGOs. This playbook has been seen before it. It was stopped, always stopped. But this has become very effective. And we've seen, I think, at least 4 organizations in the last year, usually litigating on issues of construction permits or protection of, let's say, nature and forests or reservations. So this is becoming very dangerous, and there isn't a mechanism to stop this as we speak right now. We've started speaking about it more and more. Another challenge we're also seeing is independence of the media, which has gone down incredibly, especially after 2020. Because political parties in Romania, through political subsidies that they get from the state, can pay a lot of money to the media without actually having to declare it. So a lot of space, space on traditional media is being bought off by political parties to keep silent on subjects which can be bothersome or controversial, and to support those political parties and put them in a good light. All of these things are very technical things that are actually endangering the civic space for civil society more and more. And unfortunately, there are, because of these contexts, there are less and less civil society organizations. I think there is a problem of resources as much as I think anywhere else in Europe. But in this context, where you are dealing with slaps and litigations against organization, a lack of independent media to report on a lot of these things, and in general, a political environment that is becoming more and more monopolized by 2 major political parties who traditionally, when we have campaigns, they campaign against each other, but they manage to create coalition governments when those campaigns are over. This is becoming a very small space, let's say. And I would end with the elections. Yes, Romania had all the elections this year. And I think just looking at how elections were handled, I think is a very good example of how little capacity the public administration and government has in understanding of how they should be doing their job. Let's say a lesson of bad government, if you ask me. We've had 4 elections, and the government decided to unify 2 and 2. We had European Parliament elections and local elections, and then they were not very well handled. We had people at the end of the voting day, people in voting polls. Let's say election administration waited for even 24, 48 hours outside with bags of votes to be counted, because they didn't have enough people. They hadn't thought about this. It was a fiasco. And there were serious doubts casted regarding the fairness of elections in particular municipalities because of this. And now we are preparing for the most exciting elections, let's say. We're going to have 3 weekends in a row of elections, meaning we're going to have first round of presidential election on a Sunday, next Sunday parliament elections, third Sunday, second round of presidential election. And everybody, the legislation, the problem is the legislation is being updated to accommodate this kind of context in a way. It's from day to day. And the legislation is not very well drafted. It's a sort of an improvisation for one of the most important democratic, let's say, events that we have in our democratic societies. So yes, things are not great. Civil societies face all of these challenges, but I would like to leave it on a positive note. Despite all of this, I think civil society organizations throughout these years have shown that they do essential work that the government is not doing. And we've seen this in the context of COVID pandemic, but we also saw it in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine, where it was civil society organizations in Romania throughout the country that actually managed to pull together and provide and be there and support and provide services and support that was not given elsewhere. It was guaranteed through law, but it was not given in practice. And I think they are increasingly trying to service communities which are becoming more and more vulnerable as we speak in the last couple of years. And I think if there is an area where we need to focus, I think this is it. Civil society organizations need support, more and more support in Romania as well, to be able to push through these very challenging times and to adapt to all of these new challenges that honestly we feel like every couple of years it's something else. So thank you. I hope it was...
Yes, thank you very much. It's always interesting also to hear about Romania as well, especially that you also mentioned, I believe, quite few things that also maybe that donors could focus on, where this support should be devoted as well, what kind of activities should be developed even more, and so on to counteract this trend. So thank you very much also for providing answers as well. So now. Let me just explain what we'll do now, because we have around like 25 minutes left, and I promise that there will be time also for you to engage and to start engaging in the discussion, and we will have more time in over the next hours. But just to finish with this panel discussion, I just will have one question to all of you, and I will really beg you for being concise and really brief. Really, 2 minutes long, if possible, and maybe if you can then choose if you want to maybe tell us what, because we talk a lot about current challenges mostly as well. So maybe if you can now try to look a bit to the future and maybe see what the trends, what the challenges can be, or one challenge can be expected in the countries that you are talking about. Or maybe you prefer to talk, maybe even it would be preferred, because we want to find solutions. You want to tell us what should be done, or what the civil society organizations can be doing, or maybe what kind of support could be provided, or in what areas support could be provided to them, so they are prepared to counter the challenges that may be still around the corner. I don't know, maybe we can change a bit the order, and maybe we start here with you, Elżbieta, is it fine? Yes? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's difficult to cover this ground in 2 minutes, but especially since we have a lot of experts and practitioners in this space, so you basically know what you want, what you need, what we want to do, how to do it. So my only suggestion would be that I think that at times like that, especially under pressure, we tend to start to be minimalist in terms of what we want and in terms of how we define democracy, basically, right? So we are like, okay, we can't have everything, so let's just have something, right? Let's have at least functioning institutions. Like, okay, let's at least try to save judiciary. Let's try to save free media. My advice would be the other way around. We should be the maximalist. We should really talk about not only institutional aspects of democracy, but also about what values are important for us and how they should be implemented. So that, freedom, minority rights, pluralism are not just empty shells, empty, terms that are sort of floating around. But that also means in my book that we have to think about evaluating the quality of democracy, not from the position of those, big issues like institutions, not only at least, obviously, but we should really push for a definition of democracy which quality we can evaluate judging from the situation of the people who are vulnerable. And this is, I think, something that we should really, really push for. that we should really think about refugees or migrants or women who are seeking reproductive justice as the ones who tell us if we have democracy, if democracy is functioning, if this is really equal for all. Because without that, I think we really are not doing our job very well. If we are minimalist, if we are not pushing for something that brings hope, that brings mobilization, that can be a beacon of the future. I think that we really, really have to imagine a better world rather than just, keep fighting for, the scraps that are left after the catastrophe. Thank you.
I'm going to echo a little bit what you say. As Filip said at the beginning, I've worked a lot on justice programs and justice reforms, a lot in Romania, for example. And one of the frustrations that we've had in, let's say, recent years is that the focus is always on the institutional capacity or the institutional architecture, whether it's right, whether it's going to be sufficient for them to provide the services. It's a very focused conversation on the institutions as much as possible. And my frustration has been in recent years a lot that there's very little focus on the person who should be using the service, whether that is actually efficient. Is the service that should be being provided in a way that is going to satisfy the user that should be using it? The most vulnerable person who should access this justice system, are they getting access? Is it easy for them to get access? And the answer usually is not. So yes, I'm going to echo a little bit that in the sense that I think what I've been feeling a lot for Romania in the last years, and we've as an organization been focusing on this a lot, is that we've been working more and more grassroots in the sense of working with communities, working with actually empowering people to do to be to participate, to help them get educated on a lot of these issues because there is no space for them to actually do that, to meaningfully participate and to ensure that they get access to rights that they are being guaranteed on paper, but they are not getting actually in reality. And without this, it's going to be very complicated to build societies that will be resilient and that are properly democratic in the sense that we want them, I think. And for me, it has become a focus of my work and our organization, and I think it's something that we need to consider.
Well, civic sector in Slovakia is quite skilled, developed, credible, professional, and actors of civil society in Slovakia are employing the ethos of mutual cooperation, solidarity, and so on. There are examples how civil society actors really substantially influence development, societal development in Slovakia. They were good in creation of broader democratic alliances, interconnection between different groups, elaboration of policies, promoting social innovation and so on. I mean, this is really part of the social fabric of the country. And because, as I consider, the challenge to civil society today in Slovakia is not situational challenges, it's systemic challenge. Systemic challenge. So, because dismantling of liberal democracy means demise of normal conditions for civil society development. And of course, there is an interconnection, even interdependence between democracy and civil society. I don't want now to elaborate, all this normative approach, but in Slovakia, because civil society was quite developed, we succeeded to fight for democracy, and democracy survived. So now, I think that because this challenge is systemic, civil society, particular actors, sector as such, individuals, should be actors of this fight for survival of liberal democracy. So again, to renew experience in the previous years, when civil society was very instrumental in surviving for democracy, and then, so it's one line, and then particular lines inside this sector. Higher connection between NGOs, creation of platforms. Peter Čuroš is here, he represented quite long time, excellent form of self-organizing and interconnection of NGOs, this platform for democracy. I think it's a really good platform for analyzing the situation and giving some advices to NGOs how to be more efficient in this fight. Then, of course, interconnection between other sectors. For example, credible and popular public intellectuals in Slovakia. Not all of them are directly involved in civil society activities, but they are active. So they're presenting the same or similar messages. So civil society should be more active in creation of partnership with these actors. Of course, I mean, to influence society and to persuade people that really it's a dramatic time in development of the country. So to strengthen the understanding for democratic values, resilience of society. By the way, it's a very important element, which I somehow omitted in my previous contribution, that the ruling coalition, they consider their natural actors the whole disinfo scene. So from one side, they're trying to normalize, so-called normalize public media. They're attacking independent mainstream media, but they are involving and employing the disinfo scene in their activities. They are participating in so-called show, or I mean, all this. I mean, the content of disinfo scene is today filled by the constitutional, the high constitutional representatives, Prime Minister, Minister of Interior. They are participating in performance of disinfo scene. So in Slovakia, forget about Stratcom now in Slovakia. All these units were either, dismantled or restructured, and government itself is today, people from the government, they're spreading disinfo narratives, pro-Russian narratives. So I think that, and of course they are today more influential to some groups of the population. So NGOs, I think, should be very active in this. And last but not least, and I have some personal experience with this, the NGOs should be in very close operative contacts with the European institutions. Because the government which is ruling today in Slovakia, they do not understand the language of immaterial values. For them, values are money, material benefits, of course, powerful position. And so far, European Union, European Commission was quite strict. I said that I have personal experience. In February, I was one of the initiators of the letter to European Commission in which we warned that what is happening in Slovakia is undermining the European norms. And we have got a response from Didier Reinders, Euro Commissioner for Justice, and he promised us that European Commission will follow what is happening in Slovakia and will react accordingly. And so far, it's really the case. So, and my feeling is that civil society actors in Slovakia, they are more credible as a partner for European Commission than even our government. So, of course, there are some other things which we can think about employment in our activities, but from this point of view, I am more optimistic, and I think that civil society survived Mečiar's rule, survived three Ficos government. I think that it's really quite a potent actor, and together with democratic parties, which, by the way, today or yesterday, the result of opinion polls was released, and Progressive Slovakia, which is the competitor of Smer, is ahead of Smer. So okay. There are some positive shifts.
Okay, thank you, Grigorij, also for mentioning this collective action in the importance that is also important for us. That what we also do in the program together with NDI. Now it's up to you, Daniel, in 2 minutes to say how to safeguard civil society.
We'll try to remain concise, and I will remain on the track of what to do. And actually, I couldn't agree more with Elżbieta, that we cannot extract actually the challenges to civil society from the mainstream challenges to democracy. And what we see, I think, in the broader Western world, not only in Central and Eastern Europe, that actually democratic elections were degraded to plebiscites between choices of between illiberal authoritarianism and democratic pluralism on the other side. And in the short term, reverting back to my previous point, we need to win in this game. But in the long term, if we would like somehow to stabilize liberal democracy, we need to re-establish a situation when alternatives are provided within the political center by mainstream forces. And external radical challengers to democracy are not seen by a large part of the population as the only sources of political alternatives. And here, I think the pluralism within civil society can play an existential role, because these inputs, alternatives, can come from civil society, be uploaded at political level. So I fully agree with you that we shouldn't just decrease our attention to small technocratic level, because that's the certain way to lose the battle in the long run. And second, very briefly, potentially you are recognizing that I used to talk to donors and politicians primarily. And here my call would be that please, we should stop only to preach to the convert. We shouldn't focus on convincing people who are anyhow convinced about the central role of democracy. And here my point would be democracy is not only a value, democracy is our joint interest. Without democracy, there is no such thing like West. So our geopolitical standing or future in political, economic sense, prosperity, depends from our joint democratic integrity. We need to recognize our interdependence. What happens in Slovakia, what happens in Hungary has a deep impact through the political institutions of the European Union, geopolitics, to the entirety of the Western world. The West, and sorry that will be awkward, has been invested fortunes in geopolitical swing states, in the buffer zones between the West and the East, just to keep them swinging, just to keep their Western options open, which is a fair and legitimate goal. In some cases, it's even successful, like Moldova. I am not arguing to stop it, but we completely forgot to invest in our own democratic integrity here in Central Europe, in the countries we are representing. And if we don't restart investing in our democratic integrity, then practically I doubt that we have a democratic future. Thank you.
Okay, let's hope it's not going to happen. Okay, so as I promised, we still have around 10 minutes, and I suggest that we collect a couple of reactions, comments, questions, very brief ones from the room. Please don't be shy. I'm sure you are not. We just need the first person to start. It cannot be me. I already done this, so now it's really. Any thoughts? Yes, thank you very much. And I said, let's collect a few of them.
Thanks. I have two questions. I think one is for, I'm Vlagalushka from OSF. One is from Carolina. What are the parameters of this democratic debate that could engage both, traditional civil society that we have in mind and the conservative parts of civil society? And my other question is for Daniel, actually. You spoke that foreign policy is Orban's strength. How do you think both kind of Orban's opponents and civil society in general should flip this debate on its head and actually look at it differently? I mean, Hungary, I think yesterday, concluded an agreement with Ukraine to buy Russian gas, which would keep domestic prices down. And I think somehow, I'm sure it's going to be presented as a strength of the Hungarian government, while the reality is opposite, right? Hungary is deepening dependence on Russia, and it is so bad that it is buying gas at a border that is a war zone, right? So there's nothing that is stable or great about this arrangement. It's just how do we flip that narrative? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or reactions at this stage? Yes?
Thank you very much. I have a question for Daniel. Daniel, you mentioned that the law on the foreign support in Hungary was one of the steps. Could you name those steps again? You mentioned already the law on the sovereignty, and then there is another bill in the parliament now. So just to name them, in which order they happened? And my second question would be, what is the current status of the law on the foreign support since the decision of the CJEU, if it is invalid or if they implemented the provisions in another law, how is it effective or ineffective? Thanks.
Could you just present yourself, sorry? Could you just present yourself?
I'm sorry, Peter Čuroš from Via Juris.
Okay, thank you. So now we know who you are. Since you are... Yes. So maybe one more question or comment? Yes, sure.
Paweł Augustyn Halny. I'm from the Save the Rivers Coalition, but I will ask something about security and political situation in Slovakia. Which organization, which NGOs are continuing the job that Kuciak was doing? Because we can clearly see that, the crime, the FSB, KGB, and politics are meddling nowadays even further. And what you said about that they are dismantling the security forces, well, it's obvious because they are connected with criminals, so they are getting rid of the police, right? So if there is a strong civic society movement that is trying to, like you won in the back after the murder of the journalist, if he's continuing this work right now, because I can't hear that news from the Slovakia.
Okay, thank you very much. So if there are no other burning issue for now, I understand you are keeping your questions for later. Yes, we'll have a lot of opportunities. So maybe let's get back to the panel also to summarize, to conclude the discussion, and maybe in this respect I will just let you to answer the questions that were sometimes directed to you, or maybe you would like to address any other issues, or maybe provide final comments. Maybe we'll start with you, Elżbieta.
I will start with last time.
Okay, so maybe let's now start with Daniel. I think that there were quite a few questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the questions, and I fear that I will disappoint you. I don't have any easy solutions there. I don't think that you can beat the Hungarian regime only in the narrative game, for the very simple reasons. This regime practically turned the most anti-Russian electorate and clearly one of the most anti-Russian party on the Hungarian political system over the past 14 years to a clear representative of Russian strategic interest. What happened, this deal, which is about the crude oil import via the Druzhba pipeline and its continuation to Hungary, I don't think that it in any way represents the weakness of the Hungarian regime, just the contrary. First, we need to understand that from the perspective of Prime Minister Orbán, dependence from Russia is not a weakness, it's not a threat. It's a consciously and deliberately chosen geopolitical stance. It's part of the multivectoral game, which is used to put leverage on traditional Western partners. Actually, what happened here was that the Hungarian government blackmailed the Ukraine in the suspension of the previous sanction regime on Lukoil, because they know that they have the upper hands. They can anytime block all sort of financial or military support from European sources to Ukraine. You cannot beat Orbán in the narrative game. How can you actually, as you mentioned, flip the story? Very simple. You need to create geopolitical and foreign policy realities which very obviously demonstrate that the narrative and the geopolitical positions of the Hungarian government are wrong. And it's obvious that he's a gambler. He's the only European politician, for example, who puts all eggs in one basket, for example, at the US elections. So his positions are very vulnerable, and actually on the 5th of November, all of this gambling-based foreign policy can face very serious challenges, because actually his narrative is based on that he's able to foresee strategic geopolitical changes, not always, but I think that can be seriously challenged or confirmed in the next coming months, dependent from the outcome of the US elections and actually in the longer term, the war in Ukraine. And very briefly, to the question of Peter Čurov, the 4 laws. So the first one, the 2017 anti-NGO law, which practically foreseen that that CSOs need to register, who have a foreign funding above 7 million forint, above 24,000 euro annually. This law was judged by the Court of Justice of the European Union in 2021 to be in violation of the EU law, and it was repelled. Since then, it's non-existent. There was a 2018 law, which was the so-called Stop Soros or Soros law, which criminalized actually civil society organizations which are engaged in the support of asylum seekers. In Hungary, that was also repelled by the CGEU, but actually it was never really implemented, so it was more than just a blackmailing tool. Then you have the third one, which was just adopted last December. That's the sovereignty protection law, which actually offers carte blanche intelligence surveillance opportunity for the Hungarian state about every single civic and free media actor in the country, with a blanket charge that someone is threatening Hungary's sovereignty. Try to define that before a court. Good luck. But obviously, the European Commission also in this case started an infringement procedure, but it refrained from asking for interim measure by the Court of Justice, which could stop the implementation of the law, which means that actually the strategy behind all of these legislations is that they will be repelled by the Court of Justice, but they will be in force for 2 to 3 years, and their chilling effect will act actually 2 to 3 years long. The fourth part of the legislation, which was announced in this spring, is a law about the criminalization of war propaganda. Again, I think it's a very fluid, will be a very fluid legal text when we will be able to see it. It was still not submitted to the Hungarian parliament, but it is expected that it will actually attack media outlets who are actually reporting about the war in Ukraine and the war and Russia-related policies of the Hungarian government in any critical way. So we haven't seen the text still yet, but it was announced, and obviously due to the announcement, it has a chilling effect. My last phrase. So we are implementers in Hungary. After the sovereignty protection law was announced last September, applications to our grants fall back by two-thirds. That was the uncertainty. If organizations do not know what they will face, then obviously they refrain from activities which can put them in danger. So after the law was adopted, we see again an increase because, again, there was certainty. Organizations could adapt to the new legislative realities. And against that background, I would argue that uncertainty is potentially even worse than having these pieces of legislation in place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Since we are already behind the scheduled time, so Grigorij, really 1 minute, and then we will be switching off the mics.
Very concrete question. I mean, who is continuing Jan Kuciak's mission? First, investigative center of Jan Kuciak, which is a team of international experts and investigative journalists. Pavla Holcova, Tomáš Madleniak, what I know personally, Szabolcs Pani, they are working, and from time to time they are publishing what they found out. Then there is a foundation against corruption in Slovakia, which is a foundation, it's NGO, and also they're publishing their revelations quite frequently in media, and then media themselves. I mean, this mainstream liberally oriented media like SME or Denník N. And concerning Jan Kuciak, and actuality, of course, it's his, he worked in this outlet, and this ethos of Jan Kuciak is alive still, because in many public events, manifestations, discussions, it's part of discourse. So it means that he was murdered, but the case is alive.
Thank you. Cezara, if you would like to add?
No, not necessarily, just perhaps I think it's very important that, for us, at least one of the things that I also feel, perhaps I didn't mention this, is it is important indeed to be able to have strong partnerships to make a lot of these things heard, and to consolidate some of the instruments which theoretically, at least, for example, at European level, should be highlighting these challenges that we are facing. And I'm thinking here, because I know we've had this conversation about the rule of law report, which could become, I hope, a more, let's say, a stronger instrument that could be able to highlight some of the challenges that CSOs, and not just CSOs, I think the rule of law issues that are happening in many of the member states.
Okay, let's also hope it's going to change. And last
how to talk to people that we disagree with. I have two maybe ideas based on my experience. One is to look for those issues that can connect us, obviously. And for example, when I was working with in a group who aimed to change the child care system or child support system, actually the people that I had a lot in common with were people who were from, for example, organizations representing big families and so on. So they were conservative and we wouldn't agree on many things, but actually in this area we agreed on about a lot. And the second issue is, I think, about us. I think that there is a difference between polarization and pernicious polarization, right? The strong difference and the difference which makes us see other people as enemies and not opposition. And I think that we have to work within ourselves to actually loosen the sense of unity that polarization, especially pernicious polarization, is based on. We are not sharing the same views on many issues. And then when I think about the polarization around the issue of gender, I mean, there are many different definitions of what gender is and what is the relationship between social gender and biology within the feminist movement. And I think we really should always find our strength in those differences. We are not homogeneous. We don't have to be united in that sense to actually share some political goals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So if you just allow for this great knowledge and all your experiences that you shared, the observations, and also providing a lot of answers, probably more questions, but it will be useful and will be taken during the whole event. And if you just allow me to share with you probably the three main already ideas what we can do that I'm taking from the panel. This would be, first of all, that we should keep imagining the better world for the democracy and keep telling about that openly and strongly. Then also we should also cooperate and with others within ourselves, but also with others. And then also we should also work and support not only converted ones. And it is also regarding the work of donors, but also the work of ourselves. Many great opinions have been shared with you as well. We will digest it, I'm sure. But now I would like to let you go for a break. But before, maybe just you can join me with uploading this great panel. Thank you for them. Thank you.